Zeitgeist is the German word for an impulse at a given point in time and place, which characterizes a movement. Now take a good look at the four drawings we're about to show you. They represent a sort of zeitgeist of 25 years ago, formed out of the studio of a comic book artist named Harvey Kurtzman. Harvey Kurtzman is better known abroad than he is in America. Europeans take comic book art very seriously, and they recognize Kurtzman, who's the father of Mad magazine, as the granddaddy of the modern movement of comic book art. I'm Harold Hayes, and this is Harvey Kurtzman, and we're going to talk tonight about Harvey's private and somewhat unofficial comic version and comic vision of modern America. Harvey, tell us first what these four drawings were that we just saw and what they represent.
Well, the first one was the What Me Worry Kid, which is the trademark of Mad magazine. And
has come to be your trademark as well.
I hope not. There was a guy asking me the other day if I was the What Me Worry Kid. Do I look like the What Me Worry Kid? The second drawing was of Fritz the Cat by Bob Crumb that we printed in Help magazine. The third was my very own Little Annie Fanny, which you can see in Playboy. And the fourth item was one of Jack Davis's marvelous drawings for Time magazine. Jack Davis was one of our original group that started off with comic books many years ago doing war comics.
But you all were quite closely together,
Yes.
at least 25 years ago.
Yes, we...
Of the four, the What Me Worry Kid actually is a photographic composite. Am I correct? Well, you found it on an old postcard or something?
I found it on a postcard, and it seemed to be an authentic photograph, and it appealed to me for whatever insane reason. And I tried to track it down because after I found it, I started plastering it all over the Mad magazine. And it seemed to be some kind of an authentic photo from somewhere, and we tried to find out what its source was. And we put out inquiries, and as nearly as I could make out from the hundreds of answers we got was that it was a photo out of a medical text.
And it came to be a sort of identification mark for Mad magazine in the very early years, didn't it?
Yes, well, it's now the Mad Bunny. It appears on every cover, of course.
But there was you, Jack Davis, who's now become a very well-established commercial artist, illustrator.
There was Will Elder,
who does the final art for Little Annie Fanny. Am I correct?
Present partner on Little Annie Fanny.
What, you devise the whole continuity and Will does the rendering, or how does that work?
Well, we ping-pong it back and forth. I start it, and Will finishes it. Will is an incredible draftsman. I always want to, I never say enough about Will because he's a very important man in my life, as well as being my partner now. He's probably the guy who created that concept in Mad of 1,000 little things happening in all the corners of the magazine.
Derives, does it not, from Smokey Stover? Because remember, Smokey Stover used to have little visual puns going on in the comic strip itself.
I guess there's a thread or connection, but Will is an original, and he would bubble up with these ideas, as he still does. And he just put hundreds and hundreds of funny details in the back of every picture. And I knew him as a high school student. We went to music and art together, and he was such a funny student at the time. I think I first met Will in the lunchroom. He was inside of the telephone booth, imitating a flyer being shot down in a blazing plane. He had ketchup dribbling out of his mouth, and you could see him through the glass door, waving goodbye. maybe we'll tell Willie stories later if we have some time. Because
But there was a whole group of you, Harvey. There was Will and Jack and who else? There were
there
six
was
or eight. at one time.
Wally Wood. There was a hardcore of 4 of us: myself, Jack, Will, and Wallace Wood. And
Now, did you all come together at Real War Comics? Was that the...
yes, I was doing a couple of comic books at the time for William Gaines, EC Publishing Company. EC meaning educational comics or entertaining comics, whatever letterhead you happen to read. And we did these war comics.
Let's see one.
Which were unique, or at least unique to us, because we tried to, where traditionally war had been shown in comics as being lots of fun, we tried to do real war comics to show the horror and the badness of war. And we all worked on these titles. I wrote the stories and they would draw them.
And from Real War Comics, what were you trying to do, though, Harvey? It was the comic book form at that point was basically a form of fantasy, correct?
Yes, as cartoons generally were fantasy, and I don't know, maybe it was the impulses from the moon or something, but at this specific time in history, there was a movement towards reality in cartoons and humor, certainly in the movies, and we were part of it. It wasn't that way before, and it seemed to get that way during our period and after. That is, all of the media seemed to become more reality-oriented.
And you then, therefore, moved to Mad magazine.
Yes.
Next
Yes.
stage towards reality. Do you have an example of Mad in its early form?
This was one of our early comic books.
Is that Lena the Hyena on the...
Yes, as a matter of fact, it was drawn by the Lena the Hyena Man,
I dare say
Basil
there are
Wolverton.
few who remember that.
Yeah, and of course the inside of the magazine was the comic book format. There's one of Wallace Wood's very excellent drawings. I hope you can really see the detail, because Wally put his life into his work, and the drawings hold up. I look at them now, and they're really fine drawings.
Well, it's extraordinary that there was this much effort going into what was then seen only really as a comic book form, correct?
Yeah, we worked with great pride and competitiveness. I think this was unique to our little operation, where we took a pride in work. The comic book business was really a hack business. You were encouraged to turn out volume, and we went against that tide. We wanted to do good drawings. I don't know why. It was some kind of an insane compulsion. And everybody competed with each other, and they did some of their best work back in that time.
You once said that the problem of producing a magazine of this kind was to get it before the public, because these magazines were included in huge bales with 13 or 15 other magazines, and they would go to the newsstand dealer and he would open the top of the bale, and if yours wasn't right at the top, it never would see the light of day. Is that correct?
Well, that's the magazine business and distribution business. It's still the same way. You're in terrible competition with a whole series of titles, and the distributor has to move this paper around, and he doesn't want to move it unless it makes him a profit. And very often you come up with an unknown magazine that sells for 5 cents, or at least that's what we used to do. You can't get a magazine for that price anymore. And he just doesn't want to bother with the small profit that he gets, so it's much easier for him to send the magazine back or put it aside or throw it in the shredder.
But this search for reality, taking the form of satirical humor, became very fresh at the point that it came out. And you stayed with Mad a couple of years, or however long it was, and then left and went to other endeavors. And I assume tried to refine the form as you went, correct? What was the next stage for you, Harvey?
Well, we took Mad to a Slick magazine, which you were very much involved in at the time. I don't know if you want to go into that.
I'd rather not.
And then I left Mad and went on to Trump magazine, which was published by Hugh Hefner. And we had 2 very happy issues, and then went out of business.
Very elegant, very beautiful magazine.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do.
Still trying to extend the concept.
It was the back cover on that, Harold, I think,
parody
is
magazines. Okay.
the most photogenic.
This is Hairless Joe from Lil Abner and a parody of the Breck shampoo ad, correct?
Yeah, the Breck people actually came to us after that, wanted to know who the artist was, because he really did the hair right.
Was that Will Elder's work?
No, that was Russ Heath's.
Russ Heath.
Yeah.
Well, you, after Trump, then you tried to bring out another. You were still winging it, weren't you? What was the next one?
Well, after we finished with Trump, after Trump folded, we all sat around, the artists.
It's the same group.
The same group, yeah. And we're very unhappy about the fact that we were about to break up. So we pooled our money, and we did a very foolish thing. We put out our own magazine. Artists should never put out their own magazine. Temperamentally, they're not qualified. But that was the product, Humbug.
That's a hell of a cover line.
Yeah, that was our first issue.
Why did you go out of business? That's the grabbiest cover line I've ever seen.
Well, the magazine measures about 5 inches by 3 inches, a very small magazine, and it was chock filled with talent. And talent was about all it had. It had nothing else working for it. And the distributor would put it out. For one thing, it was a 15-cent magazine. Didn't make economic sense for the distributor to handle it. And then when he handled it, he'd put it on the stand and it'd drop down behind the magazines and be lost from view. So we stayed with that magazine for a year and a half, I think. And it was the most painful year and a half of my life, because we believed, but believing wasn't enough.
And that led to your next magazine, whose title was appropriately
Help magazine.
Help magazine. Now, you're still refining the formula, I assume, at this point in time.
No, Help was well, of course, you always refine as you go, but Help was a trick magazine. We tried to do one of those things that I'm sure you remember as a editor yourself of low-budget magazines. We tried to do a magazine for nothing, and we would get stock shots, and we would get old drawings and old photographs, everything that we can get for nothing, and we'd try to enhance them with captions and with switches. And
didn't you do the picture story arrangement? An Italian fumetti, was that the?
Yes, we used to do these comic strip photo stories that are called fumettis in Italy, which I believe fumetti means puff of smoke.
Who is that right there in the corner? You can see them on
that was our assistant, Gloria Steinem, the best assistant editor that we ever had.
That's pretty.
And she was one of a number of very unusual people who came through Help magazine. We didn't do much in the way of business success, but we had a grand time making acquaintances and meeting people. Gloria was one of the marvelous people that came through the offices of Help. She was, after Gloria, came a guy by the name of Terry Gilliam, who now does Monty Python.
Yes.
The marvelous cartoons from Monty Python. There was Chuck Alverson, who's become a very fine writer. We had artists that came through the pages of Help. We originally printed Fritz the Cat by Bob Crumb, and several of Bob Crumb's works we sent Crumb to Bulgaria for a story. We sent him to Harlem for another story, and he would send back these marvelous drawings. We actually sponsored many of the cartoonists that eventually turned into the underground. There was a guy named Gilbert Shelton who did Wonder Warthog for us.
When was this, Harvey? About 63 now, 64? So it was concurrent with the beginning of the underground press.
Yes, we came slightly ahead of the underground press, but we printed many of the underground press heroes. That is, we printed Shelton and Crumb, and Artie Spiegelman and Skip Williamson. There's a whole group of people that worked for help before there was an underground press.
And they looked to you as the sort of center point.
Oh, I don't know if they looked to me for anything except a little bit of money in exchange for their work, which nobody would buy.
Harvey, you have some examples of the next stage, which evolved out of the combination of the underground press and the influence of Help Trump, Mad, and so on, of revolutionary comics, correct? Is that what you call them?
Yes, well, these were underground comics that came after Help. And again, you have Crumb and Shelton.
What were they trying to do with these, Harvey?
They got into a point of view that was really marvelous and still is, where they work for nobody but themselves, and they do what pleases them, and they break all the rules of cartooning, or they broke all the rules of cartooning. And of course they identified as being part of that movement outside the establishment, and they were at war with the establishment.
And they were using the comic strip as their mode of saying what they felt about the whole political, social situation in America at that time.
Well, they tried to. However, and perhaps that's what they thought they were doing, but to me, they were doing something quite different. I mean, they were doing something in addition, and much more important, they were really spreading their artistic wings. And if you can say that cartooning is any kind of art or form of art, you'll find it in the underground work, because here are people really letting their minds work without any conditions. And under that circumstance, they turned out the most unusual stuff that I could remember in the last 100 years.
You have one here called The Collected Adventures of the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. This is perhaps the peaking of the movement.
Well, Gilbert Shelton, who does the Freak Brothers, is a funny, funny man, and his Freak Brothers probably popular with the young people because it's so into the whole business of dope, and Gilbert understands dope and talks about dope. He's part of that culture, and so he's one of the outstanding leaders, and in addition to which he's an extremely funny man. Clever satirist.
Now, Harvey, at about this point in time, all this simply picked up and moved overseas. At least it continued to go on here, but the impulse was felt overseas, and particularly in France.
The cartoonists, as I understand it, the people who became cartoonists in France were inspired, very much inspired by the American underground comics and the satirical comics.
Can we see some examples of the French material?
This is Pilote magazine, very popular in France. It's a comic book of sorts, but it's on a much, it has much more style than the average comic book. It's printed on good paper. The level of the artist is very high. As a matter of fact, there's a story in there that we tagged, an example of an artist, Forrest, who did the Barbarella comic strip that was made into a movie.
Let's look quickly at that, but then go to the next, because I think that's one of the more interesting developments. This is the Barbarella artist here.
Yeah. And that quality, you can even see the shine of the paper, which is coated stock, which you'd never find in a comic book.
Yeah. The next stage was a political paper that came out daily, put out by cartoonists, correct?
Well, there was the equivalent of the underground cartoon in France, but it wasn't underground, it was overground underground. But what I mean by that is the problem of underground cartoons in America is they have no distribution, no way of being distributed. They're just too gamey for distribution by our standards. In France, quite a different situation exists. They can do underground quality cartoons and yet distribute them. So they're not truly underground. I mean, they're not really fighting the system. They're working inside of the system, and they're making very good money. And the two things you have here, you have a overground, underground French comic, and then you have the papers, which, as you're aware, they're done. The news happens on Monday. They sit down at their drawing boards and have drawings by Tuesday, and it's on the printing press.
And it's a daily process, is it?
This happens to be a weekly,
I
but
see.
it works on a pretty quick cycle. And the cartoonists call this kind of work, they refer to it as realités.
So they have extended the next step from fantasy to reality, going straight into political satire.
Yes, and
by
that's
using this technique.
They're very much into political satire, and they're an extension of the direction that we were taking all along, which was a move towards reality,
Yeah.
as opposed to the traditional comics, which were fantasies. And the way I like to regard it is, old comics are essentially the world as we would like it to be, and the new comics, or this new movement, are cartoons about life as it is.
Now, you also had a very interesting offshoot, however, back towards fantasy with these extraordinarily lavish comic drawings that have occurred over there. You have some examples
Yes.
of those.
These are good examples of some of the French fantasies, and I don't know why, but the French are unusually good at
Incredibly
fantasies.
beautiful things. They're hardcover.
The artist here is Droulet. And I don't think you really can televise the details successfully. I mean, you've got to really look at the pages, but
It's extraordinary.
the work here
extraordinary
is like
artwork.
nothing I've ever seen, and I don't think it's the movement so much as the artist himself.
I'm going to turn to another one. We can see if that can be picked up. Another, it's lavish, gothic color that begs the imagination. The fact that people could envision such things. Is this part of the dope vein in comic art, or is this just simply an extraordinary sort of surrealistic thing?
I just think it's pure talent. I think what happens in any area, in cartooning as well as any area, is if you can create a movement that's exciting, you draw people into the movement who are talented, who might ordinarily not go into cartooning. I think that this particular artist might have gone into television, or he might have gone into book publishing, or one of 100 things, but he was drawn to cartooning because of the excitement of the time.
How far away, Harvey, is this sort of thing from fine art?
I have no way of saying. I'm not really knowing what means fine art. All I know is
You know what
I'm
you
very
like?
sensitive to cartoons, and when I see something that's a particularly good piece of work, I get a thrill. Now, does that mean it's art? I don't know.
Do these things sell well in France?
They sell very well.
What kind of stories do they employ?
Well, they cover a very wide range. They go from their fantasy to reality, and they're doing everything. The difference between the cartoon market in France and here is you can walk into a French bookshop and find dozens and hundreds of hardcover cartoon books like this. There seems to be a very large awareness on the part of the readers and the artists, and there's a market there that doesn't exist here. I think the reasons for it are complicated. They have everything to do with the economy, the background, the printing presses they have, the distribution system, but that's the way it's turned out now, and they're very active in this business of cartooning, and it's a shame. I went to England when I visited them in Paris last year, and I stopped by at the punch offices. Now, this isn't happening in England, as it isn't happening in America, but in England it's even worse because nothing seems to be happening in the way of cartooning. And I spoke to the cartoon editor at Punch, and I said, do you know what's happening in France? It was just across the channel. My God, I knew all about it here in New York. And he said, no. And I said, are you interested? And he said, no. So I don't know. And of course, over here, there isn't an equivalent market.
But you have something new starting here called?
Well, there's this publication that came to my attention very recently. It's called The Funny Papers.
And this is the last and the latest in the vein that we're pursuing
Yeah, well,
tonight.
this is a curious publication in that it's an overground cartoon publication. It's being sold on the conventional newsstand pattern of distribution. And it employs a lot of underground cartoonists. And it's trying to do what the French have already done, but through our particular system. And it uses Bob Crumb, and it even uses Harvey Kurtzman.
Is it a weekly?
No, I think it's monthly.
And it includes also Little Nemo, who really started
Little
the whole
Nemo
thing.
is about 75 years old, and they're not above using reprints. And it's one of several things that are starting up here. The publishing system here, the magazine system here, has become interested in undergrounds, 10 years later, and they're beginning to make experiments to publish undergrounds overground.
Well, is the level of the material and the quality of the material and the revolutionary fervor of the material coming out in this overground paper now that's available?
Well, it's trying to, but as yet nobody has equaled the enthusiasm and purpose of the underground, because they haven't been able to be as daring as the underground. The underground has no strings attached.
Is the underground still alive in this
Barely.
respect?
They're just barely hanging on. It's a funny thing, but they've always had they're designed to self-destruct is what they are. The way Gilbert Shelton put it to me once, he said, if we're unsuccessful, we're successful, but once we're successful, we're unsuccessful.
Harvey, you are a part of this new enterprise, which gives me the wonderful opportunity to say that I'll be seeing you in the Funny Papers.
Harold!
Forgive me, sorry. That's it for Roundtable tonight. I'm Harold Hayes.